My brother graciously extended an invitation for us to remain at his house. There was no rent or utility fee. Stephen, my spouse, is a mechanic, and I work in finance. We live in the home where I was reared, a site with great significance in my family's past. It had originally been my father's company's headquarters. Since it was expected that my brother would take over the family business, he decided to study economics at Oxford University and earn a degree in the subject. There, he learned a great deal, and after his return to New York, he worked alongside my father to manage the company. My brother was given the business, and I was given the house when our parents chose to retire and move. I decided to move in with Stephen. The house is in a perfect location close to hospitals, schools, stores, and public transit. It is ideal for our requirements right now, and will stay that way even after our kids move away. We are incredibly appreciative of my parents for this gift and are excited about our future in this house. But soon after we settled in, my mother-in-law's frequent visits broke the silence. Since my parents had owned businesses in the past, she frequently asked about their financial situation. "Angela, how much money do your parents have?" was one of her questions, and I felt uneasy when I heard, "What will you inherit when they pass?" I pretended that I hadn't given it any thought, and that the house might be the amount of any legacy in an attempt to divert her attention. She persisted, implying that my parents must have talked to me about their financial intentions despite my attempts to brush it off. Her curiosity appeared to be motivated by hopes of benefiting from their money. I knew exactly what I would inherit, but there was an unanticipated tension in this circumstance, and I began to wonder about her motivations. In an effort to prevent any further issues, I decided not to discuss my worries with my husband, who is quite close to his mother. But then something entirely unexpected happened, which caught me off guard. On a holiday morning, at roughly 7 a.m, our doorbell rang out of the blue. To my surprise and confusion, there was a mover there when I opened the door. My mother-in-law and my brother-in-law's family showed up and announced they were moving in before I could collect my thoughts. The smiles on their cheeks made me shiver. When my husband awoke to the noise, he didn't seem to be bothered by it. He asked me simply, "What's the problem?" When I questioned him, he mentioned how there was enough room in our house for everyone, as though it were natural for them to move right in. When my sister-in-law announced that my brother had invited them, the surprises didn't stop. With a smile, she added that they would not have to worry about utilities or rent, and that they were looking forward to our hospitality. In the meantime, my brother-in-law started to nosily go about the rooms, declaring out loud which he liked most based on the amount of sunlight, and telling Stephen to pack up our stuff. I experienced dizziness as this bizarre situation developed because of the shock. They were opening doors and asserting claims to rooms like they owned the property, even though this was our home. For a while now, my mother-in-law and sister-in-law had been quite controlling. On a few earlier occasions, my sister-in-law had even dug into my purse without my consent. My patience was wearing thin as their bold actions persisted in invading my personal space. The final straw was this. I eventually took a stand after becoming irate and assertive. I said, "This is my house. Why do you behave like you own it? I'm done. I desire for everyone to depart. It was time to take back my area and make our house peaceful again. I'm not one to shout or get angry often, but seeing these individuals take over the house my parents had given me and treat it like their own made me lose my temper. I became enraged and yelled at the 3 of them for that reason. That's when things abruptly got out of hand, and one of them shot back, saying, "How dare you talk to us like that?" It is you who ought to go." A moment later, there was a stinging sensation on my cheek. It was a moment before I realized I'd been slapped. I was in astonishment, with a sharp aching in my cheek. Something inside of me just broke at that very moment. It seemed unimaginable to live with someone capable of such disdain. But this was my house, and I wasn't going to let them treat it like a free dorm. I decided to take a hard look at my options and temporarily depart. I discovered a monthly rental apartment to stay in for the time being and hurriedly packed some things. I would have to commute to work as a result, but at the time it felt like the only practical choice. After I was comfortable, I called my folks to share my story. I could feel their wrath even over the phone. My father was especially upset because he had always done a wonderful job of juggling his roles as a loving parent and a stern CEO. It was awful to involve them in this mess, particularly when they were enjoying their retirement. However, as my proper house was being encroached upon, I was left with no alternative. I knew my husband and his family were growing accustomed to my home, even as I was getting used to living in a rental unit. Inspired by advice from my father and brother, I made the decision that more action was warranted. During a work break a few days later, I checked my phone and discovered that my spouse had numerous missed calls and messages. I knew exactly why he was trying to reach me. It was time to address this situation head-on, but this time I would be prepared and not alone in my fight to reclaim what was rightfully mine. In response to the untenable situation at home, I decided to take a firm step by contacting the utility companies to disconnect the electricity and water services to the house. Our home is entirely dependent on electricity. Without it, nothing functions. We hadn't installed solar panels yet, so there was no alternative power source. Given the current heat wave, I imagined living without these basic amenities would be quite difficult. This action likely prompted the flurry of calls from my husband, who was probably trying to manage the sudden lack of utilities. Just as I was about to dismiss another call from him, he rang again during my break. "Hey, what's going on? There's no power, and the water isn't running. Did you cut off the electricity and water?" His voice was tinged with panic. I felt that since the house was mine, and I was no longer living there, it didn't make sense to continue paying for utilities I wasn't using. The house belongs to me, and now that I'm not there, it wouldn't be sensible to keep the electricity and water running. I explained that keeping these services active would mean I'd have to cover the bills, which didn't seem fair under the circumstances. When I shared my reasoning, my husband became very upset and demanded that I turn the services back on immediately. However, just because he wanted them reinstated didn't mean I was obliged to comply. I told him if they wanted the utilities back, they should pay for them themselves. Every time we discussed finances, they insisted that since it was my house, I should bear the costs, but their actions spoke differently. I had no intention of renewing the utility contracts or asking them to vacate the house. Immediately after making my stance clear, I ended the call as my break was finishing. Later, my mother-in-law, sister-in-law, and brother-in-law all reached out with similar requests, complaining about the unbearable heat and inconvenience caused by the lack of water. They wanted me to reconnect the utilities, but my decision was firm. This was a matter of principle and a step towards asserting my boundaries within my property. After hearing their complaints, I firmly told them to handle the situation themselves and hung up the phone. I suspected they were just being opportunistic, hoping I would cave, and they could continue living comfortably at my expense. However, even after a week, there was no sign of them leaving. Realizing I needed to take more decisive action, I consulted with a lawyer from my father's company. I explained the situation and requested that he send a formal notice to my husband, accusing them of trespassing. They had entered and occupied my house without permission, essentially forcing me out and treating it as their own. I made it clear in the notice that I was seriously considering legal action. This move shocked my husband, who, surprised and anxious about the legal implications, approached me hoping to find a resolution. Aware of their concern for their social reputation, I knew the threat of a lawsuit would be a significant stressor for them. Despite their desire to maintain their lifestyle, they were now caught in a dilemma between facing legal consequences and convincing me to let them stay. I could see through my husband's intentions clearly, but I refused to listen to their pleas and did not relent to his requests. In a moment of frustration, my husband exploded in anger during a call at his workplace, demanding that I drop the lawyer and accusing me of acting self-righteous. Despite his loud outburst, I remained calm and unaffected, simply annoyed by his audacity to claim rights over my property. No matter how much he protested, my stance was firm. If they come, I ended the call feeling that engaging further would be a waste of time. I had already discussed potential divorce proceedings with my lawyer. Upon returning home later, I found missed calls from my mother-in-law and sister-in-law, but decided not to engage further. I blocked their numbers to avoid any more disruptions. The threat of legal action and the looming possibility of a lawsuit proved too much for my husband's prideful family. Realizing their position was indefensible, they packed their bags and left the house. With the lawyer's assistance, the divorce negotiations proceeded smoothly. I arranged for a professional cleaning service to refresh the house. Finally, after living separately in a monthly rental, nothing compared to the comfort of returning to my own now sparkling clean home. The peace and autonomy I regained made all the efforts worthwhile, reaffirming my decision to stand up for my rights and reclaim my space. After moving back into my house, I realized it needed some updates and repairs in several areas. I discussed this with my father, who connected me with a trustworthy contractor. We started planning the renovations, which was an exciting project that marked a new beginning in my comfortably solitary life. Living alone brought a sense of freedom that was both exhilarating and soothing. I could relax on my sofa without critique, eat whatever I fancied without comments, and just enjoy the peace. However, this tranquility was interrupted when I started receiving calls from an unknown number 5 months into my newfound solitude. Initially, I assumed it was the contractor and ignored the calls, but they kept coming. Eventually, I answered, only to discover it was my ex-husband, whom I had recently divorced with a strict agreement brokered by our lawyers to never contact each other again. Confused and annoyed by his breach of our agreement, especially since he had changed his number to make this call, I demanded to know why he was contacting me. Ignoring my questions, he pleaded desperately for me to listen. Despite my reluctance, he proceeded to explain his situation. His company was undergoing a severe financial crisis, resulting in a significant salary cut. Additionally, his mother's health was deteriorating, making her unable to work, and his sister-in-law and her husband were also in a financial bind due to unstable employment. Most of her earnings were being used to cover her husband's debts. With the salary reduction, my ex-husband and his family were struggling severely to make ends meet. Hearing all this did little to stir my empathy. The memories of how they had forcefully barged into my home, assumed control without my permission, and even attempted to push me out were still fresh. Their previous actions, filled with disregard and disrespect, made it hard for me to feel anything but disbelief at their current plight. I told him that his current difficulties were his to manage and reminded him of our legal agreement to cease contact. As I ended the call, all I could think was how unbelievable it was that people who had treated me so poorly expected any sympathy or help from me now. I listened, devoid of sympathy, as my ex-husband described their dire circumstances. "We're in serious trouble. We might not be able to pay our rent or even buy food tomorrow. We used to be a family, right? Please help us," he pleaded, his voice breaking with emotion. Yet his words did nothing to sway my resolve. I remembered all too well my struggles and how, when I needed support, he did nothing to help. He, along with my mother-in-law, had always looked down on me. My sister-in-law and brother-in-law joined in too, mocking my appearance and my traditional views without a care for my feelings. My mother-in-law not only exacerbated situations, but also pressured me relentlessly to have a child, pushing herbal concoctions on me, booking unnecessary medical appointments, and even spreading harmful rumors among our neighbors about my ability to conceive. Reflecting on these memories, it was clear there was not a single redeeming period in my marriage. Once kind and supportive, my ex-husband had transformed into a mere puppet under his mother's influence post-wedding. I recalled a particularly vivid incident where, returning from an appointment, I learned my mother-in-law had visited our home, cried to my husband about wanting to befriend me, but then slandered me at every opportunity, whether at home or in public. My sister-in-law and brother-in-law would ridicule me, laughing cruelly at my expense. How could I even consider aiding them now, given their past? "Whatever you say, it won't affect how I feel," I said firmly. "I cannot help you." I was determined not to let their current situation force me back into a demeaning and manipulative loop. "I'm going to hang up now, and please never contact me again." I then hung up the phone and blocked the new number right away. I was ready to keep my distance from him and his family should they try to pull me back into their problems, even though I knew my ex-husband would try to change his number and reach out again. I was going to change my phone number at the store over the weekend to stave off more abuse. However, the deal made by our lawyers was broken by my ex-husband and his family before I could take action. About 10 o'clock at night, they suddenly arrived at my residence, knocked on the door, and said, "Open up. Please let us in and look after us. Since we are family, please assist us." They didn't care that it was late at night or that their loud shouts were disturbing the neighbors. They just wanted to ruin the quiet night. I tried to talk to them over the intercom, telling them to go home and stop making a commotion instead of going up against them. But they disregarded my entreaties and kept hammering on the door, making a lot of noise. I was about to call the police because of their irresponsible behavior, but then I heard sirens approaching. As it happened, a neighbor had already called the police. My ex-husband and his friends freaked out when they saw the cops because they thought I had called them. They attempted to run away, but they were unable to do so because of the throng of bystanders. The cops showed up quickly and took them to the station. I gave the police a detailed explanation of what happened, outlining the circumstances and my objection to their unjustified presence. The incident soon became the talk of the neighborhood, and through a co-worker who saw the scene, word even reached my ex-husband's place of employment. The public scandal and police involvement, on top of his wage cut, dealt the ultimate blows to his career and financial woes. His employer made the decision to fire him. His family's shared living arrangement fell apart as a result of his lack of income and inability to pay his apartment rent. Stephen, my ex-husband, and his mother currently live in public housing. Both of them are trying to make ends meet by working several part-time jobs. And even his mother is willing to help out financially given their current situation. Legal action was unavoidable if they persisted in squatting in my home.